But look, on a more serious note, of course, we have to turn to what is the biggest story in the United States at the moment, which should have been the biggest story weeks ago, this horrific murder of a Ukrainian refugee, Irina Zarutska, allegedly murdered by a man who'd been arrested 14 times. And of course, the media was silent. And now the coverage on outlets such as CNN is just absolutely appalling, describing the outrage that is being expressed as racist. And here is White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller blasting the Democrats for these catch and release policies of theirs.
And then you look at that video that chills our very souls out of Charlotte, that beautiful young woman stabbed to death, murdered savagely on a subway, just trying to get home from work, fleeing war, only to run into a Democrat war zone here in our country. That monster, 14 prior arrests in and out. The Democrat policies of catch and release for barbarians and savages is truly an act of terror, Sean, against the American people. It cannot be explained unless you deeply, fundamentally hate America.
Adam, I want to get your thoughts on the media in a moment, but also just Stephen Miller's points just there. He really has a point, and there's a lot of focus on the fact that this man was able to, well, he was arrested more than a dozen times before this attack took place.
Well, yes, look, and just 14 times, and I think some of the crimes were violent crimes, and yet he was still out. So this story is huge indeed. There are so many facets and aspects to it, but certainly the questions about the judicial system is a grave one and a serious one. I note the governor of the relevant state, North Carolina, has taken almost 2 weeks to say anything about this, including the state's attorney general, because they are complicit. It's their judiciary, it's their judges, and the judge let this guy out. And now this has happened. I mean, it's shocking. I think there needs to be a massive review. But the bigger question here, of course, is what this says about the US media. I mean, it's a very dark day for the US media. It's a massive humiliation. I think even for the most left-wing journalists on these big broadsheets over there, they must be ashamed, because it's shown them up as what they are. They are propagandists, and they only publish the news that they want people to know about. And they only, basically, when it comes to crime, the only crime they want to know about is basically white crime on black.
Yes.
And that is just so clearly obvious, so patently obvious. I mean, here's a story, with a video. It's horrific. It's shocking. I mean, by the standards of the media, it should have been a huge story straight away, but there was no reporting on it. And the first time I thought, I saw this last Friday on Twitter, and I thought, oh my God, this is going to be huge. And then one day went past, still nothing from the mainstream media. 2 days went past, still nothing. And then, of course, it just got so big on social media that they had to report on it in the end through clenched teeth, obviously. But that made it even worse, in my view, because they didn't even care much about the crime. It was about how the crime supposedly radicalised MAGA. I mean, it just made them look even worse. And, of course, the New York Times, in its one piece, and of course it had about 300 pieces, I think, on the white guy, Daniel Penny, who accidentally killed a guy on a train in New York trying to protect someone.
Yes.
They had hundreds of stories on that, but zero stories on this, except for one. And then in that one story, it was black with a capital B and white with a small W. I mean, it's just, they just basically, they were racist. Their reporting is racist, reverse racist against white people. There is no other way to put it.
And it's completely obvious, as you say, the media, it picks and chooses the stories or murders that they want to cover based on a narrative. And it's interesting, of course, with George Floyd's death, that went viral. There was wall-to-wall media coverage over there. And of course, as a result of George Floyd's death, there were then protests in the street. They turned into wild riots. People were uploading black signatures to their Instagram pages. We saw people in Hollywood filming themselves crying, but silence, completely different story for this Ukrainian refugee.
Yeah, and also it's just worth pointing out too, with those riots, the so-called George Floyd riots, they were fanned and fueled by the mainstream media, right? They weren't really organic, right? So the media has a hand in those. So they're very powerful still. They can make people angry and furious about certain things, and they only choose to do that when there's a crime of a white person on a black person.
Yeah.
That's almost universally the case. And when I was in the US for 4 years, this is not the only case of this. I'd see all sorts of local crimes and think, gosh, that's a horrific crime. And it's generally a black person or a white person. I remember one distinctly, a group of black youths ran over a white cyclist on purpose, and they filmed it all and laughed about it. It was just shocking, and yet there was no reporting on it in the mainstream press, none. But just imagine for 1 second if the colour of the skin had been reversed. Just imagine. It would have been a huge story for months. And I think the journalists at these publications really need to look at themselves. You know, what is their purpose? Are they reporting the news or is it propaganda?
No.
You know, just choose one, please.
It's propaganda, and I think, as you say, they've been exposed now. Everyone can see absolutely right through this, and it also goes to the power of platforms such as X. You know, so many people are on social media now, and because of I suppose even conservative influences, even Elon Musk was talking about this horrific murder days ago. People were actually able to know what's going on, and then also realising, hang on, this isn't being reported on at all. Not in the New York Times, not on CNN, not ABC. All those places have only finally caught up. Now, of course, it's reached the point where Trump has been speaking about it, but it's absolutely shocking and it's just obvious. Now, moving on to the Democrats, this photo is going viral of Bernie Sanders, AOC and Mamdani. They really are the stars of the left right now, which says so much. But Adam, it's interesting, there are reports that AOC's campaign has reportedly spent thousands of dollars at ritzy hotels while headlining the Fighting Oligarchy tour with Bernie Sanders. Of course, AOC's campaign shelled out apparently $3,500 alone at the Vdara Hotel and Spa in Las Vegas during the tour. And it's no surprise, really. It just reminds me of Bernie Sanders refusing to fly commercial, insisting that he had to get private jets while he fights oligarchy.
Yeah, certainly. Look, I think more and more Americans are seeing the level of hypocrisy here and double standards, and whatever the Democrats are doing right now, it's not working. I mean, Trump basically wiped them out in the presidential election, and sure, President Trump himself doesn't have the best popularity rating, but if you look at the Democrats' popularity rating at the moment in the US, it's lower than it's been for decades. I think the approval rating for the party is something like 30%. So, there's lots of Democrats out there hoping that in the midterm elections next year that Republicans do badly. But I think actually the Republicans could do quite well because whatever the Democrats are serving up, most Americans are not liking it. They still have quite extreme social policies. Their foreign policy is very confused, and there's so much hypocrisy about wealth. I mean, the top 10 seats by wealth in the US Congress are all held by Democrats, which is quite funny, and yet they make out that they're the champion of the poor. This is no longer the case, right? This is no longer the case. If any party is a champion of the poor in the US right now, it's more the Republican Party than the Democrats.
Absolutely. Look, let's talk about what's going on in the UK. Comedian Graham Lanham has lashed out at UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer for being a weak leader. Now, he was arrested at Heathrow Airport last week for the tweets that he posted on X, and he told Megyn Kelly that he can no longer relax while he's in the UK, and he's always kind of looking over his shoulder. Take a listen to this.
And these men have the police wrapped around their fingers. Not just me who's been arrested. There's been, several dozens of women arrested in the UK over the last 8 years. And again, these women are suffering in silence because no one with any authority will stand up to them. Keir Starmer came into power saying that he would end the culture wars, but he hasn't. He's just hid from them.
I mean, this story of a comedian arrested over tweets, it's gone round the world. It's unbelievable when you think about free speech. Where is it in the UK? Now, these comments also come as Keir Starmer's approval rating back at home in the UK is among the lowest of any Western leader, according to the latest poll. And of course, reform is right ahead.
Just on Keir Starmer, he's probably the worst Prime Minister the UK's had in the last 60 years. So his disapproval rating, is very well deserved, I would say. I mean, it's not only the attacks on free speech, which are actually horrific. I mean, there are more people now being arrested for online in the UK than in Russia, far more. I just hope Australians are looking at these so-called online safety laws, which give the UK police the power to arrest people for racist remarks or whatever. I mean, sure, we don't like racist remarks, but should people really be arrested for them and go to jail? I think most Australians would say no, and certainly most Britons too. But that is the law of the land over there now. And it's very scary because it's only going to get worse.
Really
they'll be reading your private messages. They'll be reading your WhatsApp messages soon. That's what governments would like to do, right? So it's a totalitarian mindset. And, the sad part for me is that the UK and the West is becoming more and more like China, not the other way around. China was meant to become more like us, but we are definitely becoming more like them. That is totally clear. Our governments are getting bigger and more powerful all the time. And the UK is at the vanguard of that, very sadly, because it was the home of free speech, at least at one point. So it's very sad to see. He deserves his his low rating. And then, we can talk about immigration over there too, which is completely out of control. And British people are fed up with that.
Isn't it? And we're seeing the protests, people taking to the streets, and of course they are. When you look at the numbers, more than 50,000 since Starmer's been in a position of power. What that does to a country, no wonder you're seeing mothers, you're seeing women of all ages going out and protesting, because there's also been, reports of sexual assaults taking place. It's horrific.
Well, one stat's amazing. So in 2016, the British people voted to leave the EU. And the main reason they voted to leave the EU was basically to lower immigration. They were sick of all the high immigration. And so what happened since that vote? No, immigration went up dramatically. So both parties, Labor and the Tories, let in, since 2021, about 4 million new people into the UK.
Wow.
And of course, they weren't from the EU. They were from Africa, the Middle East and Asia. So people got less immigration from the EU and they got a hell of a lot more from everywhere else in the world. And quite often those cultures coming into the UK weren't as great a fit, shall we say. And yes, there are riots now in the UK, and I think the country's in a crisis. And, frankly, neither party have been willing to do much about it. And so, as you pointed out earlier, the Reform Party is now the most popular party in the UK. And if those polls are true at the next election, then the Tories and Labor will be wiped out.
Yeah, isn't it interesting to see? And, you look at what's going on in the UK, it makes so much sense that Nigel Farage is ahead in the polls. Adam Creighton, thank you so much for your time. Brilliant to speak to you, as always.
Thanks very much.